For this part of the module, we are going to begin to look over the dynamics of a meal and what happens before, during, and after a family meal. I encourage you to go ahead and pause this slide for a moment and read this quote from Ellen Satter before we move forward so that you can begin to redefine success at family meals in a new light of long-term progress and ongoing eating competence. With this in mind, I want to go ahead and give you some short-term steps that you can use to get started without hopefully feeling too overwhelmed with all the potential or opportunity that we will capitalize on in the coming weeks in terms of what is being offered. Instead, for now, I just want you to put onto paper what you are currently doing. Consider what you might be doing as a family already for nightly meals and see how you might be able to turn it into a family style meal. And you don't need to pause the module right now to be working on this because it is something that we have in the workbook for this module, is that you can start to use that template provided in the workbook to begin to see new areas of opportunity based off the foods that you're already offering or may already offer if doing a family meal. As you begin to work through the homework, my goal is not necessarily for you to feel pressure to make the healthiest family meal or to put down all your ideal recipe ideas for your family. Instead, I want you to think of what you think you would already be successful with. So obviously with the meal ideas suggested each week, those are given as ideas for how you could offer that one meal for the whole family, depending on what food preferences your child already has. But since we'll be spending a considerable amount of time on that in the last 4 modules of the Academy, I want right now for you to just be thinking about what you would already do or maybe already have been doing and where you could be most successful. So consider right now if you're used to offering only foods that you know your child prefers and you're offering only those Love It foods, I want you to still use the template provided in the workbook to write that down so you see how much opportunity you have to begin to either make changes to that Love It food to try and help expand their taste preferences and acceptances to new foods, or where you could add in new foods and pair the preferred food with a non-preferred food. Again, I'm just speaking to the opportunity, but this is something that we'll spend considerable amount more time on in the coming modules. Additionally, if you notice that you tend to offer all Love It foods and you're wondering why your child isn't eating and yet you rarely offer a component at the meal that you know your child would like, by putting it on paper, it might help you to identify where some area of opportunity is in what you're already offering. An example of this would be with the menus provided for each module of the Academy, is that you might see none of the foods suggested on the suggested menu are a preferred food for your child. If that's the case, the goal is for you to be walking through the steps to begin identifying ways that you might be able to come up with a preferred food that fits with the overall structure of you offering one meal for the whole family. And in doing this, you can begin to get your family into the regular family meal routine. And with this, your child learns that the same foods continue to show up again and again. And so if you know your family loves to have tacos and you start offering tacos every week, that can become something that's regular and routine for your kid and fits with the overall structure and routine that you're already doing. This also means that your child starts to learn that in their feeding environment, that there will be new combinations offered and that there'll be different variations of the foods that they do prefer offered, and it starts to set the precedence of there being preferred foods available, but also some of the bigger aims of what the family environment offers to them in terms of a qualitative sense and family time together and a different tone in the way foods are offered, so that as we begin to focus a little bit more on what is being offered, the environment has already shifted to a totally new tone. As you begin to cluster what you're already doing into a more family style meal structure and routine, I also want you to begin thinking about where desserts will fall for your family. Feeding off of what we've already discussed in Module 1 with some of our own feeding related anxieties or insecurities around food, or maybe some of the ones that we personally feel that we project on our children, which come to regulation of sweets and either being overly permissive or overly restrictive with such foods. And again, in Module 2, where we talked about structure and routine and meals and snacks, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about where desserts fall with all of this. And if we can blend the modules, the first and second modules, with where we're at right now in terms of the overall feeding environment, I'm sure many of you can relate to how quickly dessert can be the bargaining chip that derails a family's feeding environment. So even if you have a wonderful family style meal in place, if dessert is left as the carrot on a stick for your child, that can quickly change the direction and change the tone and change the behaviors that are being used at a family style meal away from those that we want. So while it often seems very counterintuitive to parents, what I would suggest for you to do here is to come up with a dessert policy that's unique for your family. Depending on your child's age or feeding stage or their appetite towards sweets and interest in sweets, or if there's any medical reasons to limit sweets or things like that can all come into play. But I want you to be thinking through what seems appropriate for your family in terms of offering dessert. It might be that during the week you offer fruit for dessert, and on weekends you allow kind of more traditional dessert foods like ice cream or cookies or something like that. It might be that you know you're going to have birthday parties certain days, so you can build that into a more custom dessert policy that maybe changes from week to week. So again, as with all things with the division of responsibility, your dessert policy can be responsive to your family's real life. But the reason I bring this up now is because desserts and the sweets and the treats that we often leave to the end of the meal or until after the meal can very quickly be the catalysts for creating maladaptive behavior changes at a meal with the pressure that we begin to project on our kids when they're not eating the dinner food, and we feel that if we bribe them or threaten them or pressure them with using the dessert food, that it might get them to eat better at the meal. It should come as no surprise that these are not behaviors that I'm going to be encouraging you to do as we continue to move forward in establishing a division of responsibility. We'll be talking about each of these behaviors in much more depth in the rest of the module, but for right now, I want you to be considering how you can create a dessert policy that works for your family and to begin working through that as part of the overall family meal structure that you have in place. This might be that some days at snack, you allow your child to have cookies and milk as part of the structure, routine, and overall feeding environment that you support and can stand behind. It might mean that certain nights there'll be dessert offered with dinner, and other nights there won't be any dessert offered. But you can think of these foods being offered as a love it food if in fact they are a love it food. Most kids will prefer many of the sweets and treats that are out there. That said, all sweets or treats may not necessarily be a love it food, but if you have a meal and it's already aligned with your dessert policy to be offering a dessert also, it's okay for that dessert food to be one of the love it food offered. Additionally, pairing it with milk can kind of round out the nutrition of such a dessert as well, particularly if you're offering it as part of a meal or snack that you want to have a little bit more nutrition than just the dessert itself. And you can also begin to see how this will adapt and shift depending on the week-to-week schedule, which again we'll talk about later of how desserts kind of fit and can ebb and flow and how they're addressed and approached given different situations and scenarios. So now that we have addressed what is being offered at the meal, something that again we'll expand on quite a bit in the coming weeks, but based off what you're doing right now and with the creation of your dessert policy, if your family didn't already have one, I want to talk about what happens before the meal, at the actual mealtime event, about 15 to 30 minutes before the meal, depending on how much time you foresee needing to prep the meal yourself or needing for your family to begin to transition to the meal. If you know that it takes your child several times of being asked to go wash their hands, give yourself and them that time. Or if you know that your child is more oppositional to change and may need to be included in the transition to meals, especially when new things are taking place, make sure that you're allowing them time to come help set the table, especially since that often doesn't happen quite as efficiently as when we do it on our own. Instead, allow time and room to work together with them on the task until they can learn how to do it on their own. You can come alongside them and show them the expected tasks that are needed so that they can begin to learn and begin to take a little bit more personal investment in their own independent abilities to contribute to the meal. But the important thing to recognize here with this transition to the table is that we need to recognize how our kids need time to make cognitive shifts between activities. This is exactly why preschools often sing songs or display pocket charts with daily activities and provide many conditioning cues to the kids in the class as possible in order to help make and manage transitions as smoothly and calmly as possible. And I think at home, we can all glean from this wisdom and begin to utilize such transitional cues as well for the same hopeful intended outcome. In saying this, I know a lot of parents are already probably shaking their head with the extra time that these tasks seem to demand amidst the hustle and bustle of real life that I know can be very hard to already come by. But that's why I want to go ahead and encourage you to try these strategies first on a meal when you think you might have more time and space to do so, even if it means just a big family meal on the breakfast, or excuse me, a big family breakfast on the weekends, or allowing a little bit more margin to establish these transitional activities on a meal that you know your family will have a little bit more time and space to practice doing so. And so when you're already considering what you're doing right now in terms of what is being offered, consider what meals during the week are realistic for you to be practicing family style meals at. So whatever meals from the homework that you decide are the most realistic for you to begin trying this family style meal approach with, those are the ones that I would encourage you to holistically look at. How can you transition the entire mealtime environment to better support some of the aims and intentions that we go into a family style meal with? Allowing for this margin to establish these new transitional activities can help lessen your stress that you understandably and likely feel, and that your child might also kind of absorb from you if you otherwise express them going into a meal. I want you to go ahead and imagine for a minute that when you're trying something new, but you feel so stressed to check the boxes of the tasks to do it, that you end up maybe yelling at your kid to go wash their hands and kind of bark at them to come at the table because you've already asked them several times, and at this point you're starting to get frustrated. The challenge with this, while it's very real life as it is that the tone going into the meal already is tense. And so gathering around the table as a family, or if we're sitting with them or if we're not, likely reflects that tone and sets the stage for that type of feeding environment. Instead, I've suggested some activities here that may be helpful for your family to begin adopting in order to get everyone involved in helping, but also in mentally preparing for the meal and for the mealtime environment that you want to have in place. These include things like rounding everyone up. Again, noting that not everyone in the family might be available to join in the table. Those who are participating, it's good to give adequate time for transition and to encourage them to go wash their hands, to recruit helpers that might come help you set the table and which might help you in that way, but it might help them to have a little bit more buy-in and investment in the meal before they get to the table. Additionally, if you find yourself cooking something that's hot, or maybe in a pot that's too heavy for the table to pass or something like that, you might decide that you're going to transfer it to appropriate dishes. Again, this doesn't need to be formal or fancy in any capacity, but if you feel that functionally you need a different dish, that would also be the time to do so. Also, having your kids be involved and participate in adding novel serving tools, whether it be tongs or spoons or small butter knives or things like that that help to engage them and everyone in the meal. This can also be a good time to go ahead and have your kids help with adding those to the table. And something that we talked about last week is making sure to ensure the postural support of your child and make sure that whatever seat that they're in already is giving them that 90-90-90 postural support, so that they're comfortable at meals, but even more importantly, that they're supported so that they can properly eat at meals. Additionally, something that we're going to be talking about on the next slide is to harness the power of placemats and paper napkins. When considering how to create a new family feeding and eating environment for your family, I want you to consider a few things as you look to transition to the meal. And that would be the power of a placemat and the power of a paper napkin. And this really comes from several different feeding approaches, but one that I love and often will reference is the SOS approach. And the suggestion here comes from that placemats, putting simple placemats down on a table, can help provide a visual cue for your child that there's a transitioning happening. And this can be particularly important if, say, your table was previously being used for homework or for Play-Doh or for arts and crafts or for a game or whatever might have been taking place at the table in the day or in the moments leading up to a meal. Transitioning and using a placemat can help provide a very good visual cue for your family. So if you feel that your child may not understand that you're trying to set a new tone for your family's feeding environment, or seems pretty hesitant or resistant to come to the table, particularly if they have a negative association with what eating at the table historically has been like, something like the placemat can be a really powerful tool for your family, because as you support the change in the environment that's taking place with the use of a placemat, you're doing that a little bit in the unseen spaces of the mealtime environment. But the placemat can help show as a visual cue for your child that there's something new happening and that we're doing things differently now, without you even having to kind of fumble on your words to know what to say. It suggests something to your child in and of itself. And with this, it can begin to create some new associations for your child so that they see things are different, hopefully lessening any anxiety that they might have had previously with, wherever you're using these placemats at the family table or at a family counter or something like this. And again, this does not need to be formal or fancy. I often encourage families to use all the placemats we probably got on our wedding registry and haven't used since our newlywed days. So you're definitely welcome to use something that you already have. There's no magical placemat here. The aim really is to create a visual conditioning cue different from what you were doing before. I would not encourage you to have a really busy, highly distracting placemat, because again, on the note of distractions, we want food to be the focus. And so you want something that's very simple, hopefully something very simple to clean, and something that just allows your family to show that it's time to eat. And this is how we're doing things now, with using the placemat. Again, this is a great way to engage kids. This can be a job that kids can do from an early age, to set out the placemats before the table is set. But it can be a really helpful tool that I would encourage you to consider if it may support this transition that your family is making to a more positive mealtime environment. Additionally, leveraging the power of a paper napkin will come a little bit more in further modules when we talk about your child taking bites of things and potentially spitting them out. We want our child to know that they have an exit strategy. And I do not mean we want them to know that they can just get up from the table and leave when they don't like the meal that's being offered. Instead, what I mean is that we want our child to learn socially acceptable, polite ways that they may choose, I don't want to swallow that. And that can be really important as kids begin to cultivate some of the courage to take bites and try more new foods. And so right now, as we talk about setting up some environmental norms that become parts of the habits that we're going to build off of in the future, going ahead and setting out these placemats and setting out a paper napkin may sound very formal to your family. And again, they don't have to be used, but if you feel that they would help support your family in setting the table and setting up structure to the mealtime environment, it may support you down the road to have these tools in place. So as we begin to talk about transitioning into the meal itself and during the meal, I want you to think about kind of that first minute at the table. And I know for most of us, our homes are not calm and peaceful places as we try and round up the kids and make sure hands are washed and make sure all the elements needed are on the table and things like that. It can be a really busy time. But once everyone is at the table and is seated together, I would encourage you to consider what kind of calming transition you can do. For some families, this might be saying grace, or giving thanks, or whatever type approach fits for your family and your belief system, but doing something to center yourself and gather yourself together in a very calm way can kind of help set aside the chaos that might have been happening before the table and before the meal. And if there's any conflict existing before, it again becomes just a new environmental norm of how you transition into starting the meal, so that hopefully it starts on a more positive note. During the first 5 minutes of the meal, I want you to begin to just really focus on how you can serve the meal more family style than maybe it was before. Again, often the biggest change for families is to change from pre-plating our children's food to letting them participate and be a part of serving the meal family style. And so again, this does not need to be anything fancy, but to walk our children through what this new process looks like of serving ourselves from communal dishes. And depending on the age and strength of your child and the size of the dishes and things like that, if you're able to pass elements around the table, that might be something that you work towards depending on the age of your child. But it can be something that, again, helps reinforce the intended behaviors of sharing and passing and togetherness, but it also helps to involve your child in some of the new foods that they otherwise may say that they don't prefer or don't want, but they begin to learn this is just part of the way we do things, and there's very low expectation that you have to eat it when they're doing it, but with that lower pressure and expectation of just passing the elements and sharing in the elements and everyone taking from the elements, children tend to start eating more variety and being more willing to eating such elements compared to when they're just pre-plated and the expectation is set literally from the get-go. So, a lot of times parents will wait quite a while to initiate this kind of family style meal with their kids, assuming that their children's too young. That their children are too young, but I would encourage you to consider how Head Start programs, Montessori programs, a lot of programs see this as a successful approach with very small kids. So usually as early as 2, kids can, even before that, kids can be brought up to the table and engaged in the meal in similar ways, but usually between 2 and 3, we see that kids can really thrive with this type of interaction and this type of passing of the elements for each of the foods. Additionally, we want to think about how we can let the child decide what and how much to eat from what is on the table, and that starts with what and how much that they put on their plate. The key here is to remember not to put any pressure on them about taking something or that they need, quote unquote, to have something on their plate. We'll talk about this more during the second half of the academy, but if you see pushback when you offer your child an element of the meal, I want you to take a minute and just kind of pause and reflect on something and ask yourself, is pushing this onto their plate going to make them any more likely to eat it? And this will make a lot more sense as we continue to work through the academy, but I can encourage you that the answer is usually no. If we have to be pushing our child, it usually is pushing them away from wanting to eat that that food based off of intrinsic motivations to eat, which are the real goal with eating competence. Instead, I want you to focus on reinforcing what your expectations are. You can request that everyone take a little bit of everything, and that might help. Sometimes your child might still refuse to have certain foods on their plate, particularly based off of some of the things that we'll talk about in Module 4 with the degree of picky eating that your child might exhibit. They're an extreme picky eater and have very few preferred foods and several sensory components to them that challenge them to not want certain smells in their space, or they have more of a reservation towards even looking at the foods and things like that. It could be a big step to even have it on their plate. So again, I caution you, and yet I encourage you that as you begin doing family style meals, to take it really slow and again focus on the overall tone of your environment and promoting that tone that is maintained for everyone. And as soon as you feel that tone start to shift, to push pause and try and observe and really reflect on why is this happening? Why is this pushback? Why are they so averse to having this food in front of them, let alone near them? And to kind of start to ask yourself questions where you can begin to understand your child a lot better, which will help you significantly in the modules to come in terms of how you can best support your child with what they need in order to eat well. The important emphasis here is that this is a routine that we're creating for our family meals, and that we can continue to make progress with the foods getting onto our children's plate and ultimately into their mouth in the coming modules. But for this module specifically, I want you to be focusing on the main objective of getting your child to take place in the family meal, to transition calmly to the family meal, and eager about the family meal without some of that upfront anxiety or apprehension to even come to the table or participate in the meal. And with this, then we can begin to leverage what happens during the meal through some of the things we'll talk about today, but also in upcoming modules. As you begin to use this type of family style meal structure, you might find yourself with questions about kind of what to say or how to address certain things that come up. And so I'll try and share a few different script suggestions that might apply to different parts of the meal. So when you begin serving the meal with your family, as I mentioned, it's appropriate to encourage that, we put a little bit of everything on our plate. Again, encouragement can sometimes be a form of pressure, so check yourself and check how your child's responding to that pressure when you're setting this expectation that we put a little bit of everything on our plate. If your child resists, I would not find it worth it to get into a food battle, especially when you're establishing this new type of feeding environment. We want it to be as positive and pressure-free as possible. So all of these script suggestions, you're going to know your child and your family's dynamics the best, but these are some that can help you to kind of be more productive with the meal and in setting up that structure of passing the different elements, manners that are expected, particularly if your child, maybe gets a little overly assertive and maybe overserves themselves from the beginning. It's appropriate to share expectations with them, to share with them, you can take one serving to start, and once you've eaten that and everyone's had some, also had a chance to get some, there is enough for you to have more. A lot of times there can be an element of scarcity for kids if it's a preferred food where they think maybe they won't get to eat as much as they want of it, and maybe there's a history of restriction where they're concerned that, if they don't take tons of pasta, the pasta will run out before they have the opportunity for more. Or an element like a breadstick, if there's only one for everyone, they may feel the need to take all of them because they really enjoy those. And this is an appropriate time to calmly and confidently reinforce what those expectations are. Let them know if there's only one breadstick for each family member, or let them know you may have one scoop of pasta, but then we're going to pass it so everyone has time. That's completely appropriate to do at this stage of a meal. Funny enough, this phase of the meal can often be the most challenging for parents, and that's where you eat and enjoy your food. As a mom of 3 myself, I know that sometimes that has a million interruptions to it just based off the necessity of kids needing something or dropping something or spilling something, or me forgetting to bring something over to the table. I mean, there's different dynamics that can interrupt this piece and the enjoyment of having the opportunity to eat yourself. That said, what should not be interrupting the meal at this point is your own objectives or kind of internal mind game over, is your child eating? How much are they eating? And this obsessive fixation on the food that your child is or is not eating. Instead, to shift the eating environment for our families, we need to show and role model to our kids how we eat and enjoy the food ourselves. And this, again, can be a muscle we have to continue to exercise within ourselves in order to really recreate this type of positive and pressure-free feeding environment. But I would encourage you to role model the behaviors you want, whether that just be eating and enjoying the foods, showing respect and politeness towards whoever cooked. If you're lucky enough to have it have not been you and you want to show to your partner or to whoever else is eating with you, your appreciation for the meal and for what's offered. You can equally do this for some parents who find themselves a little bit picky themselves. You can also role model how you take a little bit, and this is something that we'll leverage quite a bit in the second half of the academy, but is with those learning it foods. How do you respond to those? What are you saying to them? What are you showing that you do or don't do with them in order to kind of learn to like them? Additionally, just showing how to talk to each other and enjoy one another's company and redirecting the conversation so it's something that's very positive and engaging and oftentimes not about food. There is a time and a place to be able to talk about the food itself, and again, we'll talk about this more in future weeks. But for now, what I'd really like for you to focus on is likely not the food. Most of us don't know appropriately how to talk about food in a way that is effective rather than in a way that's counterproductive. And so I would encourage you here to instead really just focus on building a relationship and setting a new tone at family meals that you actually want to be a part of. Additionally, this is a time that you want to either be adopting or avoiding certain behaviors. And these are listed out and shared throughout your Academy notebook, and I'll also be addressed in a few slides to come. But, using the positive behaviors that are consistent with the division of responsibility throughout this main window of opportunity that you have at the meal will be very important for setting that foundation for your family to begin to learn to like new foods and to begin to add range to the diet. And a lot of the goals that a lot of families come into the Academy with, you'll be more able to do that when you already yourself have the behaviors that you use or don't use in check. So if you find yourself a little unsure of what even to say, if you're not just saying and fixating on the food element of what your kid is eating, or trying to kind of reason with them or justify to them why they should eat certain elements of the meal, consider some of these ideas for conversation that you could have at the table to enjoy that time with your kid and really turn it into a quality time that you enjoy being a part of and that hopefully your child will also enjoy being a part of. Your family might go around in a circle and share highs and lows from the days, or roses and thorns of your day, of kind of, what were the best and the worst parts of your day, and a lot of the things that you can learn and just connect with your child in that regard. You also might discuss activity-based questions of, depending on what meal. I think sometimes the assumption is dinner, but obviously this could be at breakfast too, and talking about the activities you have planned for the day, or their sporting events that they have coming up, or birthday parties and what they're looking forward to, and just different activities from your day that might pique different conversations as well. You could play Would You Rather with kids. Again, we don't want games at the table to be used as a distraction, and so if you see that happening, I would caution you to probably not use that, or if you're already having struggles with distraction, you might not want to go down that path. But if it's something that's conversational and fun, and again helps you kind of take your eyes and your attention and your words off of what your kid is eating and things like that, some games like playing Would You Rather Be an Elephant or a Dinosaur can be really fun for kids and automatically just kind of shift the tone that they might be used to. Additionally, in my Academy list on my Amazon shop, I have shared some different conversation card type ideas if you like something that's just kind of written out for you that your children could pick from and pull from, and some conversation starters for your family that might be kind of fun and engaging as well. Additionally, you can recognize your child's contributions to the table. This is something we'll talk about in coming slides, but we want to be praising the process and not the person. And so it's great to be able to, especially as your child transitions to this feeding style and maybe needs a little bit of positive reinforcement, that you see the shifts that they're making and you see the good behavior that they're having around this type of family style meal. It can be helpful and beneficial to recognize their contributions to the table or to the meal, but not in a way that focuses on their eating. As was touched upon in Module 2, as we talk about what is the impetus for the end of a meal, and if your child's able to stay at the meal for only a few minutes, or if you have the opposite problem and your child stays at the meal for too long of a time, you might be needing to use some different techniques and tools in order to shape the end of the meal a little bit more concretely. However, the goal here would be that around 15 to 20 minutes, or whatever feels appropriate for your family. For some meals or for some families, it might be shorter, especially if it's, we're talking about a snack or, a meal that needs to be eaten in a quicker fashion. It may be 10 to 30 minutes for your family, depending on what is more normal for your family. But I would try and choose a length of time for a meal that you can stay pretty consistent with. It's okay for sometimes you need it to be a 10-minute meal, or for sometimes it to lengthen towards more of a 30-minute meal, but you want to have a pretty clear expectation so that you can help do behavioral modifications for your child to help them be able to sit for what a normal period of length would be for your family style meal before you begin the cleanup activity. And that's when you can begin to express expectations to your child and be consistent with what does indicate the end of a meal. And when may your child be excused? Is it because the timer is out? Is it because everyone else has finished their meal as well? Is it because they have to ask and you or your spouse arbitrarily say no, and so your child maybe doesn't quite understand what dictates the end of a meal in a more concrete sense? Or is it because your child misbehaves or throws a fit and that becomes the end of the meal? And so we can see with structure and routine and a change of environment how we can begin to set more appropriate supportive expectations so that our child hopefully can thrive more within this routine and structure, but also thrive more with clear expectations that have been consistent for them. Some things to think about as you find yourself coming to the end of a meal is, what does that transition look like, and how to handle it if, say, your child doesn't eat much at the family style meal initially and does get up from the table having eaten very little and then comes back 20 minutes later, and how do you handle that and things like that. And so I've shared some different script suggestions depending on when your child comes back saying I'm hungry after a meal is over. But having some of these in your toolbox can really help give you the confidence to know how to end a meal without using some of the pressure tactics that might have historically been used to try and get your child to eat more while at the meal. Again, our goal is to be keeping the meal time itself very positive and very pressure free. And so if you're feeling like come the end of a meal, you're not ready to give up or get up from the table because you don't feel that your child has eaten enough, this is an important time to, again, pause and reflect yourself on why are you doing this? Is there another way that you could more productively and proactively be handling this through some different approaches or behaviors, or also some of the script suggestions shared here in terms of how you can set very clear expectations and boundaries for your child about how the mealtime structure and routine, but also environment looks now with the use of family style meals. So now that we've reviewed a high-level overview of how a family style meal can look before, during, and after the meal, I want you to notice that nowhere in any of this did I mention that you should be pressuring your child to eat or panicking if they're not. While I know each of us has the goal of expanding our child's Love It list and wants to work through offering new foods from their Learning It list, I'm encouraging you here to know that this will come. However, if your child's feeding environment lacks structure and routine, and it's very hard for them to even come to the table and enjoy a meal with you, and that family style meal rhythm hasn't yet happened, there will be very few opportunities for you and your child to even be able to practice their job within the division of responsibility. If you aren't practicing your job within the division of responsibility and you're instead resorting to old tactics, such as, kind of the alternative family meal approach, or some of the behaviors at the table that are counterproductive, but in the moment seem like they might get you small wins, I would encourage you to pause and see how that might help, or how that might stall your success and hinder your ability to implement some of the things that we're going to be talking about in the second half of the academy because of the shaky ground that you've been setting your family's feeding foundation on. Instead, the more that you can really focus on enjoying time at the table and making these meal times pleasant for you and your child, the more progress you'll be able to make in the future because of the foundation that you've worked so hard to put in place.